We're moving through the life of Joseph now in the book of Genesis. This is starting in chapter 37. The script pretty much moves into the life of Joseph and continues to the end of the book. So in chapter 37, we find that Joseph is 17 years old in verse 2, and he will be 30 years old when he begins to lead Egypt as the second in command of Egypt, only under Pharaoh. So 13 years is going to take place between chapter 37 and the end of the book. When we come to this particular portion, we find that Joseph is the pampered son of Jacob, and it says that there's a lot of problems going on in the family here. In verse 2, for example, Joseph brought back a bad report about the other brothers to their father. That couldn't have been real healthy. I mean, he's tattling on his brothers. We don't know what they did, but Joseph went and told Daddy. And it says in verse 3 that Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons, and it made him a special tunic as a result of that. Now, what could go wrong there, right? Here he is, he's the favored son of his father. His dad marks that out by giving him a special tunic, some special clothing to identify that he is top of the line here. He's the one that's truly loved. So we're not real surprised in verse 4. It says the brothers hated him. And then Joseph goes and has a dream, and in that dream his brothers are going to bow down to him and so forth. And so, verse 5, they hate him even more. And then in verse 8, actually verse 5, they hated him more because the father loved him. In verse 8, they hate him even more because he has these dreams in which they're going to bow down to him. And so he is just filled with hate as far as boys are concerned. They just hate him. Verse 11, they're jealous of him. So this is not a happy home. There's some real issues going on in Israel's home between the boys. So when the opportunity came along for the rest of the boys to get rid of Joseph, they take that opportunity. Daddy sends him out into the wilderness aside to check on the other boys as they're doing the sheep herding and so forth. And as a result of that, they see an opportunity to get rid of this guy that they truly, truly hate. And so they decide, verse 18, to put him to death. And even verse 19, here comes that dreamer. So here is his brothers, and they have plotted now, taking this opportunity. He's away from his father. He's out from under the protection of the home. Let's kill him. But one of the brothers, the oldest, Reuben, verse 21, decides to rescue him and talk the boys out of doing that. So they simply strip him of his beautiful tunic and throw him in a pit. And then when Reuben was somewhere else, they saw this caravan of Ishmaelites coming along, so they sell Joseph to them, and he goes into slavery into Egypt. What an ugly, ugly scene. When Reuben comes back, he's beside himself because of this. But the boys now take this tunic, they rip it up, they put blood all over it, they send it back to Dad, and they go back and tell the father that they found this. Apparently something bad has happened to Joseph. Of course, this breaks Jacob's heart, and the boys don't seem to care. What a hard set of young men. Willing at one point to kill their brother, sells him into slavery, breaks the heart of their father, lies and deceives. And this is just a very, very ugly scene that we see here. And we do find now that Joseph goes into slavery into Egypt to Potiphar's house. Potiphar is the captain of the bodyguard in verse 36. So that's a pretty ugly scene. There's two comments I want to make, though, as we close this rather clear narrative down. First of all, consider the hardness of their hearts. So we see just an ugly, ungodly set of boys. These men supposedly have been brought up under some kind of guidance from Israel concerning Jehovah and the truth of that life. And yet, if he has taught them anything, they haven't listened very well. Their hearts are simply filled with jealousy and hatred towards their brother. Then the other thing that we have here is that in chapter 50, verse 20, at 13 years, no, more than that, many years later, Joseph says to his brothers in chapter 50, verse 20, this remarkable statement. He says, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive." We don't see it at this time. Certainly Joseph didn't see it. But years later, Joseph recognized that God was in this all along. His hand was in it. They meant it for evil. God meant it for good. Nobody saw that in chapter 37, but we see it in chapter 50. So we see the sovereign hand of God, even in the midst of terrible choices and ugly actions on the part of these brothers. We can trust in our Lord even when things are very, very dark. That's the takeaway from this whole section.